Hi, this is the weekly Democratic Alliance Labour Report. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for once again watching. We really appreciate it. In these reports, we discuss the various issues with regard to labour law, and labour problems within government, some of the legislation. And what we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be discussing the compensation for occupational injuries and diseases amendments that have now been debated for the last 2 weeks in Parliament in the Labour portfolio. This is Sunday, the 2nd of May 2021, and I thank you very much for listening. This is Michael Bagram. I'm the Labour spokesperson for the Democratic Alliance, and I really appreciate it that if you can maybe distribute this to family and friends, business associates, do it through Facebook, WhatsApp, and any other medium that you do have. So I appreciate it. Now, the legislative process, we know in Parliament, is long, it's complex, it's tedious, and to put legislation together can take years. It's very similar when you have amendments to legislation. Those amendments can also take years. They go to the public for debate. It goes through portfolio committees. Once it's done through the portfolio committee, it then is debated in Parliament. Once it's debated in Parliament, it gets sent off to the legal advisors. It gets sent off to the presidency, possibly even to the National Council of Provinces. So it's a long and hard process, and it's something that we have to watch very carefully as the official opposition to make sure that legislation actually makes sense, to make sure that the legislation is functional and is implementable, because unfortunately in South Africa today we have legislation that doesn't make sense. We have some legislation that is very negative to job creation and certainly very negative to employers and sometimes to employees. Well, in this particular piece of legislation, in the amendment that we're going to see being debated in Parliament, this amendment is going to be very negative for employees and of course for employers as well, but mostly for employees. Now, in terms of the compensation for occupational injuries and diseases amendment bill that they've put forward, there have been some good things in there, some bad things, but there is one thing that is absolutely horrific, and I intend to debate that today. I intend to give you some sort of input in what it's all about, and I'd like to get some feedback from you. You can get back to me via email. It's Michael, Michael, at Bagraims, BAGRAIMS.co.za. It'd be good to have more commentary and more public input. It would be good to hear. We've had commentary and public input from many institutions, and a lot of them are against what I'm going to tell you right now. Now, we know that the fund itself, the COIDA, we can call the compensation fund COIDA, it's been dysfunctional for just over 20 years, and they've actually put together all sorts of administrative systems. From what I understand is they've spent over R500 million on IT systems, and the latest one, they call it CompEasy, is also completely dysfunctional, and we're hearing that from private hospitals, from doctors, from all sorts of groups. It's very interesting to see in that not only am I, Michael Bagram, getting input from the public as to their claims that aren't being fulfilled, very similar to the UIF, but I know that many of the people in private practice in the medical field are suffering in that they never get paid. Now, that being said, every employee has to be registered through COIDA. Every employee has got a claim if they are injured at work, or they get ill at work, or via work, or on the way to and from work. They have a claim. The employer has to complete the forms and they have to send it in. Now, most employers will tell you that when they try and put these claims through, they have major hassles. They invariably don't get paid. Most employers just pay the bills themselves, and it's actually a dysfunctional fund. And one of the things that employers have found out, and one of the things that doctors and private hospitals have been using over the past few years, which has been functional, is going to intermediaries, to third parties. Those third parties buy the claim. In other words, you fill in a form. Let's say you are an employer. Your employee is hurt in a motor accident on the way to work. You fill in a form, you submit a claim to the compensation fund, and in that form, and you in turn need to take that employee to a private hospital. Now, you don't want to pay for that private hospital. You want to, obviously, the fund to pay for that, because that's why you've got insurance. And you have to find a hospital that will first of all see a patient who is a COIDA compensation fund patient, because many private hospitals already are saying we won't see those patients. Many private doctors are telling me, I've spoken to literally hundreds of doctors in the Western Province, and they're telling me that they're not keen to see compensation fund patients because they never get paid, and that their practices fall apart and their cash flow is completely stulted because of this. Now, the reality is that you do want to be able to see the patient, you want to be able to give the proper advice, the proper medical care, and likewise with the private hospitals. It's a big chunk of their work, and they would like to be able to treat those patients. So what they've done is, let's, for instance, I'm using fictitious figures here, but let's say, for instance, that private hospital says, we will take you in, thank you for this, we will invoice you, which in turn will be invoiced to the fund, but we won't give you that invoice. What we'll do is we will purchase that invoice from you, so we get you to sign off that you've received the treatment. We in turn, let's say we're going to charge you 1,000 Rand. We in turn will sell that to a third party. You sign it off, we'll sell it to a third party. So you as the patient pay nothing. You as the employer pay nothing. We will take from the third party, the intermediary, instead of 1,000 Rand, we'll take 800 Rand. And we'll get the money immediately, and we'll keep our cash flow going. The intermediary will then take that, spend the money on the 800 buying that claim, and now have a claim for 1,000 Rand. With that claim, they will then send it off to the compensation fund, to COIDA. COIDA then, in theory, is supposed to pay them immediately because they are now the owners of that invoice. They've factored the invoice to the third party. The third party claims from COIDA, and COIDA would, in theory, pay them, and everything would be hunky-dory and things would go on. The hospital will see the next patient, or the doctor will see the next patient, and there's no problem. Now, the problem that we do have is that these intermediaries, in turn, might not get paid. So what do? They claim them, and they go up to millions and millions of rands, and they try and claim it from the fund. If the fund doesn't pay, they then sue the Minister of Employment and Labour. They take him to court because they've got the clout, they've got the wherewithal, they've got the lawyers, and they've got the money to sue the minister. And they sue the minister for tens of millions of rands, and they can prove all these claims because they bought all these invoices. And in turn, in the court, they win. And the minister has to pay not only the claims, but the interest on the money. In other words, it takes sometimes 3, 4, 5 years to get to court. The minister has to pay the interest, plus has to pay the legal costs, and the minister has to pay the government's legal costs. So government loses out all round. In other words, they've now had to pay interest, they've had to pay the intermediaries' costs, they've had to pay their own costs, and there's a lot of downtime for all these ministerial staff and staff within the Department of Employment and Labour. That's been working to the extent that obviously they're getting their money. And obviously government doesn't like this, they don't like to get sued. So now in terms of the amendment, they're trying to stop that claim. They're trying to stop people being able to sell, in other words, the medical practitioners to sell those claims to an intermediary so that they won't get sued, which is insidious, because what will happen is the medical practitioners will stop seeing the COIDA patients. They'll say if it's a staff member from way back when, and if that staff member got injured, sorry, we can't help you, go to a public hospital. That puts a whole lot of more strain on the public hospitals, and at the end of the day, the patient doesn't get the best advice and the best treatment that they can get, even though they have insurance through COIDA. So what's happening is the hospital groups, obviously the medical practitioners, the whole profession, profession, is saying, don't put that amendment through. Who's going to suffer? Not us. We will then see only private patients, but it'll be the patients that suffer. And so I'm asking you to have a look at it, to see the folly in this whole thing, and to understand that the Minister of Employment and Labour is merely doing this to avoid litigation, which is so silly when in fact what he could do to avoid litigation is just actually improve the administration of his fund and pay people what they so deserve. So thank you for listening to me. It's Michael Bagram, the Democratic Alliance Labour spokesperson. It's Sunday the 2nd of May 2021, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.